Hey guys, this video is for PFIN Chapter 7. Just going to do a quick chapter review. Again, this camera just seems sorry about that. Although you don't have to look at me for very long, I'm going to share the screen to PowerPoints. So this chapter, I'll share it right away here. PowerPoints Chapter 7. Go right to the top. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, Chapter 7, here we go. So Chapter 7 is looking at the finances of housing. Now, this was a chapter I wanted to spend more time on in class. I mean, actually, I've kind of done that for other chapters as well, which is why we're getting behind, but I'm just kind of into some of these subjects. I was going to expand on this a little bit. I mentioned that in class because I'm really into real estate, and I would just kind of give some different perspective, but because of what's going on, that's not really going to happen, and I'm going to try and keep this really short. I could talk about this stuff for whatever 3 or 4 hours, but I feel like that's not really appropriate right now. I want to keep this video to under 15 minutes if I can, so I apologize. If you're really interested in some of this type of stuff, just send me an email. We could even do like a Zoom call and I can answer questions for you, but I feel like no one's going to watch these videos if I just rant for 3 hours. Anyways, here we go. This is one thing I wanted to ask people right away, kind of a trick question, but which one of these properties is a condo? If I had to guess, I would say most people are going to say that this property is a condo, right? Again, it's kind of a trick question. It's actually this one. This is a condo. This is not a condo, and this is not a condo. I think people get confused with that. They think that apartment style buildings are condos, but a condo isn't a type of physical structure. A condo can come in all forms. This could be a condo or not a condo. This could be a condo or not a condo, and this could be a condo or not a condo. It just depends on the ownership structure. So you would think that this building here, top left, would be a condo, but it's not. This is an apartment building. And the way it's a purpose built rental building, meaning it was built to be rentals, to be owned by one company, and they're not individually owned units. Sometimes these types of buildings, apartment buildings, can be built as condos, meaning every single unit is an individually owned unit, and that's when it becomes a condo. But usually, if there's a building that's being rented out like that, it's not a condo. If you can buy them, then it is condo. Now, this is just kind of like a townhouse style, but it's detached. That wouldn't really be a condo. There are times where you might have a setup where there's some shared ownership. Maybe the parking lot or something is shared, and you have condo fees and stuff. And then this one here, this is a single detached house. So that's the physical style. It's a detached house, which usually isn't a condo. This type of building is usually the condo. But this does exist where there is some type of shared ownership. And it's not the actual structure itself. It may be that it's on a private street. And so the street is owned by the condo association, and everyone still has to pay condo fees. And the condo fees would probably just pay for like maintenance of the street and the street lights and maybe garbage pickup and stuff if it doesn't belong to the city. And this actually exists in Saskatoon. This is property in Saskatoon. So just so you're aware, I think that's a common misunderstanding, that people think that all apartments are condos and only apartments are condos, but that's not true. Anyways, long rant. Next one, I'm just gonna kind of go over some important concepts here. So when determining what type of housing is suitable for you, of course, like anything, it depends on your lifestyle, your needs, your desires, your attitude, what you're looking for, what suits you, financial factors as well. Just a note here, traditional financial guidelines suggest you should spend no more than 25 to 30% of take-home pay on housing, or no more than 2.5 times your annual income. That 2.5 times your annual income would mean for the outright purchase. So if you're earning $50,000 a year, that would be saying that was at $125,000. You shouldn't spend more than that to buy a property. But of course, like, I think the lower the better. Like, I spend less than that on my accommodations and I'm comfortable, so that's great. But other people, maybe they're fine with spending more. Changes in the economy and society no longer make these guidelines valid, which is definitely true. And I would say that's not a good thing. Like if your average house is selling for $350,000 in Saskatoon or whatever, like, you know, off the top of my head, you'd have to be earning whatever that, like $150,000 per year in order to follow those guidelines. So that's just not realistic anymore, and that's in large part due to interest rates being so low and stuff. But yeah. So evaluating housing alternatives, just comparing life situations and comparing rental to purchasing. So yeah, it really depends. There's advantages and disadvantages, depends on your situation. You can read through these if you want. I'll kind of skip over this, but it is important. And you know, some people say that renting is stupid or it's a waste of money, and it can be, but not always. Sometimes buying is not a good decision and a waste of money. Next thing, opportunity costs of housing choices. So opportunity costs, we've covered that already in this class, and you cover that in microeconomics. Things like interest earnings on lost money used for a down payment, or the interest on a security deposit for an apartment. So either way, if you're living somewhere, you're probably either renting or buying, unless you're living with someone. But even if you're living with someone, they might require a security deposit from you. By paying that security deposit of $1,000 or that down payment on a house of $50,000, you're losing out on the interest you could be earning by having that money sitting in the bank collecting interest. Although right now with interest rates, you're not going to get much. And that's in large part to why people are just like spending more. There's no incentive to keep money and save it and put it in the bank, really. It's really cheap to borrow, and there's very little being paid out on your savings. Loss of equity growth when you rent. So yeah, you typically housing prices go up. Like if you look at a 50-year span, most years out of that, they're going to go up, although the last, 5 or 6 years in Saskatoon and Regina, housing prices have declined. But if you're just renting, you don't have any equity. And if you don't have any equity, you can't realize those gains and increase in property values. Time and money to repair and improve lower priced home might require a lot of renovations. Any type of home is going to require repairs and maintenance and stuff. Yeah, keep going. Housing information sources. I think this is pretty obvious. Books, library. I mean, people aren't using that too much. It's going to be the internet that people are going to be jumping to get information. Real estate section in the newspaper. That was the case 15 years ago, 20 years ago plus, but now pretty much all real estate stuff is online. I think I even showed you guys a virtual tour of property before in Saskatoon, so most people are just relying on that. Realtor.ca is a great website to check out what's available. Right here, where's my cursor? CMHC is values Canada Housing and Mortgage Corporation. It's actually this is typed out wrong, but it's the CMHC. They have a lot of useful content on their website too. And Financial Consumer Agency of Canada. Next slide is just looking at some advantages and disadvantages of renting an apartment, renting a house, owning a new house, owning a previously owned house, owning a condominium, owning cooperative, owning a manufactured home. So obviously with anything, there's advantages and disadvantages, and it depends what suits you the most. Like again, some people think renting an apartment is stupid, but it's not. Like in some situations that makes the most sense. Like if you're moving to some other city to do your master's degree for 8 months only and then you're leaving, why would you buy a house? It would make the most sense just to rent a simple apartment. Like you're just there temporarily, right? Whereas if you're planning on living in Regina for the next 40 years and you're happy with a certain location, it might not make as much sense to rent an apartment. You might just want to buy a property and own it yourself and be able to earn equity. So feel free to look through those. I'm not going to go over all of them just to keep this short. This video is already getting along. But again, reach out to me if just for personal reasons, if you're interested in this type of stuff and want someone to discuss it with, because I'm pretty into this type of stuff. I have a lot of content on my blog as well. Advantages and disadvantages of renting. Mobility, if you're renting, you can, unless you're in a contract, you can just give a month's notice and you're free. You don't have to worry about selling it. You don't have to worry about maintenance and repairs so much, and lower initial costs. To start up with renting, it's pretty much just paying your first month's rent and then deposit. Some disadvantages: fewer financial benefits, meaning you can't build up equity in the property. Restricted lifestyle, so there might be more restrictions on what you can do. You might not even be able to paint your walls. You might not be able to have a pet, things like that. You'll be usually tied into a lease. Yeah, things like that. Just the steps in renting. So that's pretty obvious. I'm sure most people in this class have rented before. So searching for a property, kind of going over the lease, and then living in a property, and then when you're moving out. Yeah, I don't need to go into too much detail with that. Just when doing the search, important to consider location, whatever makes sense to you. You want a nice building exterior, interior. Consider all things that are being offered. The lease, are pets allowed? Is it a child-friendly building? Is it a safe neighborhood? Things like that. Now this is just looking at lease, which again, I'm sure most of you are familiar with, and we covered this in law class as well. So the lease is the rental agreement. The rental contract should have all this information on it. Obviously, the address of the property, the name of the owner, landlord, the name of the tenant, the dates, the amounts, all those types of important information. One key thing here with renting is negotiate. As I've said before, like in our society, we're not really used to negotiating. Most places we go, there's a fixed price and you take it or leave it and you don't negotiate. But with buying a property or renting a property, you can negotiate a little bit. You say, hey, if I sign a 2-year lease instead of a 1-year lease, will you give me $50 off rent? Or, hey, I know you only allow 1 pet, but if I paid an extra $20 a month, could I have a second pet? I have 2 cats, whatever. Things like that are negotiable. So don't be afraid to negotiate a little bit. And we have Provincial Residential Tenancies Act, so you can look over that for more information to know your rights. Next thing is home buying process. So first step of buying a home would be determine your needs and the advantages of owning. So there's pride in ownership. People are going to take better care and more responsibility for a property when they own it than if they're just renting it, right? Like just like with a vehicle, a lot of people when they rent a car, they bag it or whatever. Whereas when it's your car, it's like, okay, you want to destroy your car? That's kind of stupid. But there is pride in ownership. The financial benefits mentioned already. If the property value goes up, you have more equity. You can borrow against equity, which sometimes isn't a great idea, but it is an option. And owning, express your individuality. So if you have a single detached house, you can change the exterior, you can landscape, you can do whatever you want in the interior within reason. The steps to the home buying process, and similar to renting, it's determining what you need, find and evaluate a property to purchase, price the property, obtain financing, and close the purchase transaction. Pretty straightforward. Again, I could rant about this stuff for hours and hours. I want to try and keep it short here. Disadvantages of owning: financial uncertainty. Home values could drop, which is rare, but it has been happening a lot in Saskatchewan. So it's kind of a reality check for a lot of people, and good to see that. You have to get a down payment and financing. Limited mobility. So it can take time to sell. If you all of a sudden get a new job in a new city, if you're renting, you can just say, hey, landlord, I'm giving my notice. I'm moving out at the end of May or whatever. But if you own a property, it's not that simple. Like you have to sell it or find someone else to rent it from you. It's, it restricts your mobility. Or if you start having like really noisy neighbors, or you don't feel safe in your neighborhood, it's pretty easy to leave if you're renting. It's not so easy to leave if you're the owner. Maintenance costs, repairs and improvements, higher property taxes. Well, if you're renting, you're not paying property taxes. Your landlord is paying property taxes, and your landlord is paying those property taxes by collecting rent from you, but you're not paying them directly. Types of housing available: single family dwelling. So that's kind of what we looked at on that first picture in the chapter. So single family just means single detached, just one individual dwelling, not connected to other properties. So just like a house is typically what we would call them. And then multi-unit dwellings could be duplexes, townhouses, even detached houses with designated basement suites or apartments. So just multi dwellings within a property. Manufactured homes, so those would be ones that, I mean, typically they would still be single family dwellings, but those would be like pre-made, and you'll see those like on a vehicle being delivered. Mobile homes, probably familiar with those. Or you could build a new home as well, which could be a townhouse. Typically it would be a detached property though. So maybe not like a semi-detached townhouse. If you decide to build a home, consider the following, and that doesn't necessarily mean you're building yourself. Like you might not actually be the one on site constructing it, but you're overseeing it. You've hired a builder to build it for you, which is pretty common. Some things to consider, like is the contractor you've hired experienced and reliable? Do they have good working relationships with suppliers, electricians, architects, plumbers, carpenters, and others? Payment arrangements, delays, that's pretty common. Like when people tell me like, oh, I'm going to get possession in June, I'm thinking like, okay, enjoy your possession in October. You know, typically those things are delayed. You know, it'd be good to find a contractor that has a proven record of being on time somewhat. And are they licensed and insured? So this is what I talked about earlier in the chapter as well, condominium. A condominium, it's an individually owned housing unit in a building with several such units. It's not a type of structure, but it's a form of ownership. So as I said, you can have all different types of physical structures that are condominiums. It could be an apartment building, it could be townhouses, it could be single detached houses. It's the ownership style, not the physical building style. With several units. So that picture I showed you, no, that was just one unit, but it's several units on this street, which is a private street, which is what makes it multiple units in that context. Cooperative housing, subsidized housing, so usually funded by government, geared to like low income. Some other terms here, down payment, everyone should be familiar with that. That's just like your initial payment for a property. For your mortgage, you know, that could be anywhere from 5 to 100%. Most people are probably paying 5, 10, 15, 20%. Paying 20% makes it easier to get a down payment. And when you pay 20%, you don't have to get extra insurance. If you buy a property and you're paying less than 20% as a down payment, you have to get this extra insurance through CMHC, which is definitely costly. So I don't recommend that, but your call. And a little point here on RRSP. So I talked about those already in that class as well. That's a useful thing where you can put money away into your RRSP, avoid paying tax on it, and then use it to buy a property. And when you take it out to buy the property, you also don't have to pay tax on it. You just have to pay it back over the course of 15 years. These are some premiums for loan insurance. Mortgage, just a breakdown of what mortgages are. I believe we've covered that already, not too important, but some ratios that are going to be looked at to determine how much of a mortgage you are approved for. We covered these already a little bit in class. One thing I would recommend is if you are serious about buying a property, or even if you're just curious, go on some banking websites and look at mortgage calculators. You know, if you want to buy a house that's worth $300,000 and you're putting down 10%, which is $30,000, you're gonna have to borrow $270,000 at current interest rates. You can take a look at how much you'll actually be paying in interest. I did write a blog post on that too. It's pretty interesting, and I think I showed you guys that in class already. You end up paying a real large amount of interest over the course of the mortgage, and especially high in the beginning years of your mortgage. So step 2 is find and evaluate property and search. So location, using an agent, having an appraisal, having an inspection, pretty straightforward stuff, I think. You can hire an inspector. You know, with location, maybe you want to be near a school. If you have kids, you want to be maybe a safe neighborhood, or something with a lot of amenities, whatever suits you. There's no right or wrong answer for that. When conducting a home inspection, exterior, interior, pretty straightforward stuff there, but it is very important. You don't want to be buying a property without properly inspecting it, and a year into it realize it has tons of problems that you never caught, and now you have a bunch of things to repair. Step 3 is price the property. So determine how much it's actually worth. Just because they're asking $350,000 doesn't mean you should pay $350,000. So that can be looking at comparables, which is recent selling price of homes, demand, length of time on the market, features and condition. Making the offer here, we've discussed that already, and really ties into contract law like we covered in law class. Contingency clauses. So these are like kind of conditional sales where a buyer might say, yeah, I'll buy that based on getting approved for a mortgage, or the seller might say, yeah, it's sold, you can have it on the basis that I can sell my current house within the next 60 days or something. So that would be a contingency in the contract. Just some details on offer to purchase. Step 4, obtaining financing. So, just getting a mortgage approved. Fixed rate mortgages, we've kind of talked about this stuff already too. Fixed rate mortgage where your interest rate isn't changing, you're locked in. Variable rate mortgages where the rate is variable. It could change if the prime rate or the overnight lending rates go up, which they've just recently gone down, but they can also go up. Just more stuff on financing, how you can finance a home. Second mortgage, that's a home equity loan. The 5th step, close the purchase transaction. So that's just closing the deal, as they say, just finalizing it. Closing costs include the fees and charges paid when the real estate transaction is completed, and they include title insurance, search fee, lawyer fees, property survey, land transfer taxes, mortgage insurance, things like that. So there can be quite a few expenses involved in purchasing a house. Typically, those expenses are more so falling on the seller, not as much on the buyer, but the buyer definitely has expenses too. I mean, moving expenses. With a real estate commission, typically a buyer doesn't pay any commission. It's the seller that pays the commission. Here's just a breakdown of costs, and this would depend so much on the type of property, the region you buy in, things like that. I don't know how up to date this is, but yeah. Some more elements of buying a home. I think this is the last one. Selling your home. So if you're wanting to sell your home, prepare your home for showing to prospective purchasers. Obviously, you want to make it as attractive as possible. You want there to be demand for it. You want people to be interested in it. Determining the selling price. Usually just looking at what comparable properties are worth. You can sell by yourself, or you can sell with a real estate agent. That's up to you. So that is it for chapter 7. Again, I apologize for rushing through it, and I'm disappointed because I really like this stuff and I think it would be a really good class, but I don't want to make a 4-hour video for you. But again, send me an email if you have any questions on this assignment, this chapter, or even just if you're personally interested in it and want to discuss it a little bit more with me. I'm open to that. So thanks for watching, and that's it.